So just to say welcome everyone, and it's lovely to be with you virtually. My name's Miriam Haughton, and I'm here on behalf of the Irish Society for Theatre Research to host a conversation, just a bit of dialogue, a bit of debate, a bit of reflection about what were the Irish Times Theatre Awards. But the title of this webinar is it time to bring back the Irish Theatre Awards? So just to really note, we're here on behalf of this voluntary research organisation, ISTR. We're not here on behalf of anyone else. Most of us who work in ISTR are full-time researchers and academics. We are not full-time or professional artists. The majority of us, we're not involved in the awards in any way. So we're sort of at one step removed, but we do spend most of our time thinking about theatre and performance and writing about it, trying to teach it when we can, but mostly we get taught, I think it's fair to say. But we've really felt its absence since it was paused in 2022, paused for very good reasons and for reasons which need to be reviewed and reflected on to see how theatre and performance is operating as a sector in terms of fairness and representation and storytelling that intersects with the country we're living in. But there's a difference in meaning between the words paused and cancelled. And I would just say personally, it's starting to feel like they're cancelled. And January is depressing enough. We don't need to make it more depressing by taking away the theatre awards and the bit of crack. And that can be there if we get the ingredients right and if it runs in a way that really benefits the arts sector by being critical and celebratory. So the purpose, again, just to reiterate, is just to host this conversation, which is being recorded and which will be posted to the ISTR YouTube site. It's not anything else. We won't find an answer in one session, but we're very much willing to host other conversations if people among the arts community want to. I think it's kind of bittersweet for a lot of people now. There's so many award seasons on globally. There's so much Irish talent out there. And yet, among the theatre people we have in the country and the really superb level of theatre and performance that happens year in, year out, we're not getting to mark the celebration, even though we can see it happening elsewhere. And so maybe it is time to really hunker down and see can we move the conversation along. So just a tiny bit of housekeeping. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. So I'm very grateful for agreeing to be here on a Sunday evening when really everyone was sort of looking at having a stretch and sticking on a movie and getting the popcorn ready and not thinking about Monday, but instead you're online. So I'm very grateful to you for that. We'll have a couple of questions, which I'll put to each speaker. And after the speaker, if anyone else wants to add in, feel free to raise your hand, put a comment in the chat. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Barry Houlihan, also from the University of Galway, who'll help moderate that. And if I miss things, he'll interject. And we'll just let the conversation flow. If we don't get through every topic now, as I said, we can host another webinar down the line. That's no problem. We'd rather have a good conversation and try and understand every perspective around a point of view rather than move through it too quickly. So that's really it. So I'm just going to move on now and introduce our speakers. And I'm going to read their bios very obviously off our website because there's no way I could remember them. So first, I'd like to introduce Esosa Ighodaro, who is a Nigerian-Irish writer, director, and vocalist. She makes work for stage and screen, and her work highlights Black talent and tells more varied stories of the Black experience in Ireland, using humour to explore more serious themes. She is a resident artist at Access Art Centre, where she's developing new work over a 3-year residency. She is also an associate artist with Civic Theatre, Tala, where her work focuses on supporting more artists of colour to engage with the Irish arts sector to create new work that speaks to their lived experience. Esosa is a 2024 resident director at the Abbey Theatre, where she was engaged in a programme to grow her craft and skill set as a theatre director. Her work for screen has been screened at film festivals across Ireland, US, and Southern Africa, winning an Audience Choice Award. And her work for TV and film is currently in development. So Esosa, thank you so much for sacrificing your Sunday evening. I'll move on to Anne Clarke, who is the founder of the multi-award winning Landmark Productions, one of Ireland's leading theatre companies, which has celebrated its 20th anniversary in 2024. In that time, she has produced 46 plays, 3 operas and a musical, 33 of which were world premieres. The company's work has been seen on major stages overseas at the Barbican, National Theatre and Royal Opera House in London, at the Edinburgh International Festival, at St Anne's Warehouse and BAM in New York, as well as in the West End and on Broadway. So, Anne, thank you again. Clearly, there's other things you could be doing, but you're with us. And lastly, but not least, we have Luke Casserly, who is a multidisciplinary performance maker from Longford. His work weaves together ecological research, autobiography, sound art, and sight as a way of carving out space for new possibilities to emerge between live performance and physical landscapes. His project has brought audiences through city streets, back gardens, train stations, beaches, and a bog in the Irish Midlands, which have led to the creation of a network of wildflower meadows across Ireland, the planting of 1,000 Indigenous trees, and the development of an organic perfume made using botanicals from the Irish bog. In 2023, he was awarded the Arts Council's Next Generation Award. He was recently selected for the Norman Houston Multidisciplinary Commissioning Award with Solas Nua in Washington, D.C., in addition to being chosen to participate in the International Forum as part of Theatre Treffen with Berlin Festspiele 2023. And his work has been presented both nationally and internationally across Ireland, the UK, Canada, US, and Serbia. So that is an amazing amount of experience and perspectives and backgrounds, and it's a real privilege to have you with us. So, on that, I would like to begin with the first question I have for the three of you, which may seem kind of obvious, but just to really hash it out. We're all saying we miss the awards, and why? Is missing awards enough to bring them back? What is the wider value of the theatre awards? What can they do? What can they achieve that perhaps isn't so explicitly obvious to a wider community? So I might begin with Anne there, if I can pick on you first, Anne.
Yeah. What do we miss about the Irish? Well, so yes, so I think I'm probably one of the few people in the country to have been to every single one of the Irish Times Theatre Awards in its 25-year history. And I even remember before that, I remember the Harvey's Theatre Awards, which nobody else will remember. Um, and I suppose there is no awards ceremony or event or process that is perfect. And every year, the nominations would come out, people would hash them out. But what they do is it provides a moment to acknowledge the often incredible work that's gone the year before. And I think especially for theatre, which is an ephemeral art form, it's really, really important to capture that energy and that achievement, and to celebrate it. And I think it also, I mean, the awards also did other things. They sometimes provided a platform to younger artists. It meant something to be nominated to win. I always really appreciated the section where we looked back on people we'd lost during the year, just to acknowledge their contribution and just to memorialize it, I suppose. And it just seems to me that, there are awards for everything, not just in the arts. I mean, obviously, there's the IFTAs we've just had all over, the television, which is part of the problem, I think, in that the Irish Times Theatre Awards from certainly in recent years didn't have that visibility. But there's the Irish Book Awards. There's every single organization, everything you can think of has an awards. There's an Irish Cheese Awards. It's important to celebrate and acknowledge the achievement of people who work very long, very hard, and often for very little material return. So yes, I think the awards are important, and I would just like to thank you for bringing this conversation to the forefront. We've all sat around in the last year or so saying it's terrible the Irish Times Theatre Awards are gone, and what can we do about it? And finally, there seems to be a little bit of momentum in terms of actually doing something about it. So thank you.
Oh, no, that's brilliant, Anne. Thank you so much. And if I could move to Esosa and your take on what are the awards good for, in your opinion, or not?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with all that Anne has said. And I mean, what can I add to that? I mean, I think we cannot um, understate the importance of celebration and acknowledgement, and being in the same room with other industry professionals is always so um, enriching and fueling. And I think it's something that we do need. But maybe ultimately, I think, and again, it's sort of piggybacking on what Anna said, yes, there are all these award ceremonies currently happening. And having one is a way of acknowledging that art is important. Theater, the work that we make, is important. It isn't it isn't frivolous, though, art can be frivolous, but it's still important. And I think having a moment to celebrate that, to acknowledge people's work, to say thank you, I just think it can't be overstated how important it is.
Thank you, Esosa. And I hope we someday reach a point where no artist or art lover feels they even have to make the argument that art isn't frivolous. Like, I think we've gone so far past that in terms of what theatre, art, performance, all of it does. Um, if ever anyone sort of made that argument now, I don't know that anyone would give them that much time. But again, it is good to just highlight that importance, that significance, that recognition, that community, and that without it, something's missing. And so what we're here to is to flesh out the whys and what can we do, to see can we move things on a bit further and maybe have more of a shared communal confidence, in award systems. Thank you. So I'm going to go on to Luke, and then afterwards, if there's anyone from our lovely audience who have also sacrificed their Sunday evenings who'd like to chip in, do raise a hand or pop a question in the chat. So Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. And yeah, thanks. Just to kind of reiterate what's already been said, but thanks for hosting this conversation. I think it's brilliant to be talking about it. And I also agree with a lot of what Esosa and Anne have just said. I think now more than ever, celebrations and gatherings are really, really important. Particularly from speaking with colleagues in the sector over the last while, I think there's an increased feeling of isolation, in the sense of we no longer, or I suppose the sector is no longer resourced to work as a in company structures in the way that they used to be. So a lot of people now, it feels, are working in a very individualistic way in terms of I'm me and I'm working on my project and you're you and you're working on your project and it's a project to project basis. So I think gathering is really important in terms of mitigating that sort of sense of isolation, I think that can really easily creep in. And I suppose it's awards are useful in terms of I suppose they reinforce the civic importance of theatre and can often strengthen arguments for public investment in theatre and also in the arts more widely. But I think also, just to pick up on what Anne was saying as well, like theatre as an art form is so ephemeral, and I suppose the awards are really important in terms of their role in acknowledging artistic labor that's often precarious and goes unnoticed in a really ephemeral art form. Theatre often disappears at the end, once a run finishes. And I suppose the awards create a sort of longer lasting legacy or a record of excellence that I think is really important in terms of capturing and also kind of capturing what's happening culturally, at a particular moment in time and what's resonating for audiences. They also, I suppose, bring sort of media attention to artists and companies, which can often be really, really helpful if it's an emerging company or an emerging artist who might otherwise, reach a limited audience, particularly in a small theatre ecology like Ireland. I think awards can be really influential in terms of getting the word out there about a company or about somebody's work or a particular production. So yeah, I think they're really, really important. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens after this conversation in terms of what new form they might take going forward. But yeah.
Thanks, Luke. It's kind of sad to hear you talk about how increasingly you guys are a bit, did you say more individual or more isolated from each other, the theatre community? And I
I
didn't.
suppose Yeah, in terms of the project to project basis, it's hard I think to achieve a sense of longevity often, in terms of being able to plan ahead, in terms of making work.
And
Um,
is that just the outcome of the fact that there isn't currently multi-annual funding in place for individual companies who aren't on a legacy strand, should we say?
I think
And
that's part of it. Yeah, I think you know, it's there's lots of different factors to it, but I suppose like the idea of an ensemble theater, in the old sense of the word, no longer exists because, it's the ecosystem isn't resourced to operate like that. So this kind of idea of togetherness, I think, is more and more tricky. And also just having this might be going off topic slightly, but in terms of like, I think it's really important that more established artists and emerging artists have opportunities to meet and actually have a dialogue and have conversations. And I think it's becoming harder and harder for that to happen. And those kind of large gatherings of the sector are few and far between. I know there are some. There's the gathering that's run by Performing Arts Forum and so forth, and lots of other things. But yeah, it can be isolating, I think.
no, that's tough to hear, and I wonder are there other ways we can be involved in that because artists being isolated, no, that's not a good thing. There has to be ways to meet and connect and get that sort of chemistry going. Barry, did you want to pop in there? Do we have a question or some comments we should bring in?
Yeah, just keeping an eye on the comments coming in, and it's great. And please just encourage that as well, 'cause it's very much a dialogue for everyone who's here, as well. But even just one comment there from Owen, and if Owen wants to elaborate on anything, please do. But just again, repeating that it's a way of meeting people, getting a sense of the national scene, and shows you the recognition, um, uh, of the misbenefits around the international recognition for the work of those who are nominated. So again, the visibility of the work, but also who makes the work, is probably just an important point to drill home, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's that going back to that cheesy phrase, you have to see it to be it in a way. Like if you remove visibility, so in a way you can internalize that and stop reaching and aiming and thinking ahead. I think I see another comment there from Louise Donlan.
Hey.
Very important to help venues promote shows to audiences. So thank you, Louise, for that point. Um, I might move on to another question. And Anne, due to your admission that you've been at every award ceremony, I'm going to start with you again. Sorry. Um, and also apologies if you can hear my cat meowing. I explained to him not to interrupt, but he won't be told. But if we can keep a hold of what happened in 2022 for a second and go pre-2022, because in a way it's likely, and I'm guessing this, I've never been involved in the Theatre Awards in any way, but it's likely there were other challenges as well as the issue with that awards and those nominations, that may have caused the Irish Times Theatre Awards increasingly complex to host, whether it's financial reasons, sourcing judges, how theatre and performance are increasingly interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary and having the right categories, um, the commercialization of all events and the pressure for things to be commercial. Could you see over the last decade or so, or however long, pressures on the awards and how it was operating and struggles?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to say, the Irish Times hosted, ran, administered the awards for 25 years, which is a long time. And, and they, it was of huge benefit to the theatre sector. And I do think you know, we should acknowledge that. I think there was a feeling for quite a while that the awards were hanging by a thread. When they first set up, they were televised. There was great fanfare, and then they gradually, the ceremonies themselves, it sort of became more modest. And Yeah, I mean, I think there had been certainly, um, Jerry Smith, who was the arts editor of the Irish Times, had been a tremendous advocate for the awards. Uh, then they had sponsorship and lost sponsorship. So it's not really surprising, that, at a time when newspapers are, having to examine their financial future, that something like the Irish Times Awards might fall by the wayside. And I think it's a shame for a number of reasons, partly because it is important that any awards system should have longevity, and should have also buy-in from the sector and from the public, and should also be transparent and all of those things. I think there was another particular, apart from the financial side, I think it was tricky that the Irish Times system had just 3 judges, all of whom, made a tremendous commitment in the years in which they took it on. But at the end of the day, it's 3 people, and 3 people isn't, I was going to say, it's a narrow breadth. Anyway, it's not a widespread of opinion, of expertise, of taste even, so that was always going to be tricky. And I think it was constructed like that in order that the 3 people could conceivably see as many shows the length and breadth of the country, and that it wouldn't be possible to have more people do that. But I think concentrating that amount of decision making in the hands of just 3 people is problematic. Added to which, if you're going to be able to commit that length of time, it means you're at a certain point in your life, career, financial well-being, all of those things. So again, that narrowed the perspective. So I think that's just a logistical thing that needs to be examined in any future awards.
Can I come in there? I have loads of questions now. Who televised it? Was it RTE?
I think I think it was RTE to begin with, and then I think it ended up on Tina G, and then it ended up not being televised at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
Sorry if I could just interrupt. I think that's right. Hi, it's Una. And I don't think RTE televised it for very long, Anne.
Yeah.
I think there was only maybe 4, if even 4 years or so, that they did it.
Yeah. It was when it used to be a big awards dinner with a fancy, spots and the Burlington kind of thing.
That's when they had a big financial sponsor. The ESB used to sponsor it.
The ESB?
Yeah. And they paid for everything.
Nice.
Geez,
we should have invited them to the webinar. But just
well, that is 25 years ago, in fairness.
Yeah, well.
If I could, while I'm here, just say as well, with all due credit and everything else to the Irish Times, I think it was also always, and I'd be interested to know what others think, it was always something of an issue in that whilst the Irish Times covered the awards extensively themselves, because it was another newspaper, you never got literally one word of coverage in any other paper. I mean, very occasionally it might be mentioned somewhere, but in general. And do other people think, is that your memory also?
Exactly, I think that is exactly it. Yeah. Which is an issue if it is a media outlet, I suppose. That's what yeah. In an ideal world, it would be an independent organization, and
Okay.
coverage would result. Yeah.
Yeah, all really important points to note. Just in judging, I mean, it's not the same thing at all, but in research, we were usually, our academic grant applications would go to the Irish Research Council, which is now Research Ireland. But there was a rule implemented, I don't know, was it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that anything over €100,000 goes to international peer review, on the understanding Ireland is just too small. And it's not to discredit any judges in Ireland. And of course, that's possible because you're emailing a document. You're not going to see a show around the country every week. But that understanding was it needs that bit of distance, and it was getting harder and harder to have that distance within a small community. So that was that decision taken. But I know that's not comparable. So I'll just ask Luke, would you like to pop in?
Yeah, I suppose just to add to that, I think actually the Dublin Fringe Festival Awards have a really interesting model in terms of that peer recognition idea. I think they have over it's quite a large number of judges. I think it's 15 to 20 artists made up from and arts workers from different different disciplines. And for anyone who's not familiar with it, the judges go to attend there is at least one or two judges who attend every production in the festival that year, and it's a very sort of intense job because it's obviously over 2 weeks or whatever. Um, but I wonder, like, is there something from that model that could be adapted going forward, in terms of representation and geographic spread of people going to see work across the country? Is there something to be said for there being 30 judges, on a panel, and that those judges, two or three of them or more attend, different productions, and so there's a kind of consultation then at different points in the year to check in. Just on that topic of I suppose assessment and judgment, and looking at other ways to do that isn't putting enormous pressure on three individuals to see every single thing, which feels like a logistical impossibility. But yeah, I guess, as well, just to kind of steer in a slightly different direction as well, but I do think they're quite connected. But just in terms of the televising, I wasn't aware it was televised in the past, but I think also there's a huge lack of investment in cultural writing and cultural journalism in the country in general at the moment. And I don't know, there's a lack of, I think, critical discourse and stuff going on. So, there's events and stuff that happen as part of Dublin Theatre Festival each year, like the Young Critics Program, and there's an International Critics Program as well. And those events, I love them so much, and they're so rare because, you have people speaking who are able to sort of reference productions within a wide context, so if you're going to see a show at the Abbey, it's within the context of all of the other things that have happened there over years and years. And I think that the awards also sort of maybe play a role in that. Also, I suppose I know I'm hopping around now in terms of points, but in terms of the categories in the past as well, I do think they were quite limited in their scope. And perhaps the categories from, 10 years ago don't maybe accurately reflect the broadness of kind of a contemporary practice. I'm thinking particularly in terms of community-based work, site-specific work, I suppose theatre has perhaps become more disciplinary in a lot of cases, and I'm not sure if the previous award categories reflected or recognized that scope of work.
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant point. And just seeing this, our students who would graduate year on year, um, if they want to work as an artist, they wouldn't assume they're working on plays, with beginning, middle, and end. They would, the focus increasingly is, oh, I'll take a bit of this and a bit of that. And, they don't really worry about it, or if there's rules, or if there's a sense of you can't do that, or that's not how it's done. That consciousness
Yeah.
seems, they don't seem burdened by it in any way. And it's very much, what else can I have and use? Yeah, so I think that's a point very well made, which you see then in programming in a lot of the festivals, particularly with, I suppose, young graduates and that generation who are moving into it and finding their feet.
Yeah.
Simply, I mean, some of that's a resource argument as well, in that, how are any sort of people who aren't connected to a venue or a very established organization in any way going to employ a cast of 8 to 10? And in
Yeah.
terms of salaries. So there's a resource argument, but then there's also just the contemporary practice argument as well. On that, I know Esosa.
Also, sorry, to just one last thing to mention as well, a fun fact that I learned last week, but the Arts Council published a document recently with their statistics in terms of attendance for, I think it was 2024. And I think in that year, 824,000 people attended a play or a theatre production, which I was really pleasantly surprised to hear. It was that high, which I think is really significant as well. But yeah,
Yes, and wouldn't it be lovely if we heard about it on the daily news like we
well,
do at school?
exactly,
I'll
exactly.
save that webinar for another day. Don't worry, it's on my list. Sosa, I just want to make sure I have a chance to bring you in here on all and any challenges. And following this, I think it is important to move on to 2022 and pay it a fair bit of recognition of the issues around race and representation. But are there other issues before we get to that you would have found maybe limiting or challenging in how the awards were operating, or even, and that's not a critique of the Irish Times, but just a sort of a recognition that the performance community in Ireland continues to evolve. So one previous structure that may have worked for a decade or 2 decades suddenly becomes
Yeah.
fitted.
Yeah, and I guess I can't really speak to how the awards were operated, but I guess I will say, in complete contrast to Anne, the only theatre awards ceremony that I attended was the last one.
Okay.
I had never been invited. I had never had an opportunity to go. There was nothing there for me, and it kind of just went by me in a way. And I think maybe this leads on to the whole
Yes.
2022 thing, but it's that maybe this is the limitation, that it could tend to be a gathering of people who always gather, and not necessarily opening of the door for people who hadn't been there before.
Yeah.
But that's also down to programming and programming choices, and what we see and what gets funded. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's an important point. And can I ask you then, can you recall the awards show and the subsequent pausing of it in 2022? Are you happy to discuss your memories of it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Specifically to ask me the question, Miriam.
Okay. Well, I wasn't at the awards in 2022, but I understand there was a statement released on behalf of performers um, about the nominations, which seemed to display, I'm trying to be careful with my language here,
Sure, I will. Yeah.
a
Okay.
bias.
So that's before this. Yes. So the nominations came out. I had been working on a play at the Abbey, an Octoroon, which was a cast of, I think, 10 people, 8 of which were people of color and 2 were white Irish. And the nominations came out, and only the 2 white Irish people were acknowledged in the nominations, which stood out particularly because they weren't the lead roles in that production. So it stood out, and it felt like, I guess we will call it unconscious bias. And so we released a statement really to, I guess, to say, hello, did you notice that this is what happened? Did you see that? Did you see? So I think the subsequent pausing, now cancellation of the theatre awards, was a surprise. It wasn't the intention for
But it was such an important statement. I mean, that statement has probably woken up. Many people are very aware of these issues. I don't know that I was that aware, to be honest, until I read the statement. So in a way, I'm sort of becoming educated around race and performance in Ireland because of it. And so I'm sort of strangely grateful to what happened in 2022, even though I imagine it was quite difficult if you were part of it. So yeah, two performers who were white Irish got nominated, and the rest, including the leads who are black, did not. And so it caused a lot of upset, a lot of controversy, and then it got paused. But prior to the 2022 awards, you were never at an award. So that might be good if someone could tell us how you got invited to the awards. I take if you were nominated, that was your ticket. Could anyone confirm or redirect me? Is that how one would get entry to the awards?
Yes. Hi, sorry. Joanne Ryan here. Apologies for the intrusion earlier with dealing with my son's dinner. How embarrassing. Yes, so the only year I was ever invited was the year I was nominated for an award. So that's true of everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I do.
it's also true that a lot of people would be invited who were not nominated.
Oh,
Yeah.
And I think, and I see that Deirdre Falvey is here, and I don't know, Deirdre, if you have anything to add, but certainly my read of it was that obviously the managements and senior personnel from the various institutional kind of theatre sector would be invited. And then various kinds of, people who would be well known. But essentially the Irish Times made a list, quite an extensive list, of people who they thought ought to be there. And what's your estimate of how many people? 300?
Gosh, I don't know. Wasn't there a thing as well that you could buy extra tickets?
You
In
could,
latter
I
years,
think
you
it's worth
could.
saying as well, you could buy a ticket as a member of the public just to attend.
Yeah.
Definitely in the last couple, yeah.
Yeah, in latter years when they moved it to the concert hall, you could buy a ticket. That's right. But yeah, I think that as I say, my instinct is the Irish Times did their best to kind of try and gather together a list of the theatre community,
yeah,
kind of generally.
yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting though, isn't it, that question about, whether you're welcome or invited, and that thing that Luke was talking about earlier in terms of sort of feeling slightly outside, sort of working in isolation and not part of the community. Like, yeah, I mean, just knowing that it would be possible, or knowing that you I don't know what I'm trying to say. I suppose knowing that it's for you, even if you aren't nominated, or knowing that it would, it was a way to gather together, not at, we used to say, like, isn't it great to see everybody, in their finery, and not at a funeral, because that's the only other time that people, outside of opening nights to a certain extent, would come together.
Yeah.
And it was a really celebratory thing. And I think that's a really important thing to hold on to as we begin to talk about what might a new awards ceremony look like, is around that aspect of coming together and everybody in the community knowing they're invited.
Yeah, yeah. And also in that conversation of what a new ceremony might look like, which I think we'll get to in a moment, to keep in mind those structures of representation. I know in the universities when they were all getting very nervous about gender because of a lot of court cases, the focus was on unconscious bias, and everyone was being sent off for their unconscious bias training. And that really annoyed me because I wanted people to focus on the conscious bias. Like, I can handle and forgive the unconscious bias, which I'm guilty of and have internalized in many ways myself. But the explicit discrimination is what bothered me. And sometimes, it can be very broad in terms of how we deal with structures of representation, from the unconscious bias because things have been done a certain way, to the absolute explicit discrimination, and making sure we take account of that full spectrum. So that was just something that used to really sort of annoy me when I was at work and I'd be invited to do more unconscious bias training so I wouldn't discriminate against myself. But yeah, I've moved on, as you can all see. Luke, would you like to make any comment there? I didn't mean to pass you over just when we were talking about 2022 and it getting paused. Or as a white man, are you going to stay quiet here? Yeah.
No, I totally agree with everything that's been said already. I don't think there's anything more to add there than has already been stated. But I think, we need more transparent processes, and I think a much more inclusive criteria,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, and I think the structures of how certain productions and plays and venues would tend to get, there's resources behind certain areas, which means it's going to be more accessible to produce something of scale, of a high production quality, which may then likely lead to a greater chance of nomination. And then through that, certain dynamics become reproduced. And so, yeah, just sort of acknowledging that and bringing it with us when we move on to the next question. Esosa, would you come in there
I
again?
just wanted to add that, so the statement was released and all this, whatever, blew up in whatever way. And then, you know, the ceremony itself, I believe one of the judges had a speech that indirectly addressed, but we never heard anything from the theater awards. Actually, it was just, okay, great, cool, no, shutting down. And I would like to think it wasn't just because of that. So whatever other problems meant that it made sense to pause. But, you know, when they speak of conversations and, you know, who was invited to have these conversations, you know, who was invited to plan and to think about these things. And I think this is why it has ended up as a cancellation as opposed to a pause, because people maybe didn't want to have these conversations and didn't actually want to look at, I don't know, I'm wildly speculating here. I feel
That's
like
okay. We've
if
invited you
conversations were
quietly.
had, then there might have been a faster, clearer way forward.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, please do wildly speculate when you're invited to an ISTR webinar. Well, on that, I might ask Barry,
Yeah.
you have some news from Irish Theatre Institute. If we move on to this idea of what might a future awards look like, me being very cheeky posing that as a question, ISTR has no money tree out in the back garden. We're voluntary and all pay 20 quid a year for our membership, and then we host a conference. That's it. So we won't be sponsoring it, but we will absolutely support it if it can happen. But you have some news because you're on the board of ITI with Esosa.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll get to that just before. Just one other comment there, I think was just worth picking up on from earlier, was just from Aisha. And it was more about what was lost by not having that gathering, not having that community together each year. And yes, it was about reflecting back on the year that has happened and on the work that was produced. But you know, just an interesting comment there that says that yes, that when the recognition doesn't happen, that can translate into loss of funding confidence, loss of touring opportunities, loss of international visibility, and even career momentum, which is interesting to think about the next year forward, that the afterlife of the work is potentially being lost because it's not being picked up on. You might have an international exchange and you don't have a theatre award to hang off it that might catch the eye of a programmer at a festival somewhere else. You know, it was just something that caught my eye there in the comments, and maybe that might pick up, be a point to pick up on discussion later in this conversation. But to go back to ITI, so yeah, that came up in discussion there as well. And I just want to read out the proper wording here. So, of course, Niamh O'Donnell, as CEO and director of ITI, are aware of the pausing of the awards and that gap that has created. So, within its own planning for the year ahead, and again, I'm just, I suppose, sharing Niamh's comments ahead of this event, was that it was included within ITI's program to have a feasibility study commissioned. And just to get funding to do that. So while this discussion is kind of thinking about it and talking about it, the next step might be, well, how do you go about programming them again? How do we establish it? How is it funded? And at least that feasibility study under ITI has been funded, and it will happen. So that's important, that at least there'll be some, you know, a roadmap laid out of, it needs X amount of resourcing, it needs X amount of people. This might be the criteria of judges that might be needed. This is the sponsors we might consider. And it might be a point of getting some of those discussions and experiences that are being mentioned here today through into that feasibility study, so that we know what it might look like going forward. So that's really positive. It's at least a good next step. And that, you know, when we have more on that, we'll be able to share that hopefully through ITI.
Brilliant. Thank you, Barry. So on that, Anne, I might come back to you. What do you think a future award ceremony might look like or feel like or something, if you have thoughts?
Okay, so I think it's fantastic that ITI are doing that piece of research, because I think it's great not to try to reinvent the wheel. You know, there are other systems, other processes out there. I do think one thing that sort of has come across is in terms of having the importance of acknowledging theatre that happens outside Dublin And I think people who make theatre in the rest of Ireland quite often feel, and this goes back to the point about there, being less criticism, theatre criticism overall, and less robust criticism. But I think quite often people feel they're slightly, labouring in the wilderness. So whatever system is in place needs to be able to account for the geographical spread in a way that isn't too onerous. I think it has to be more than 3 people, however that's done. I think there, and maybe it is a thing that there is along the lines of the fringe model, that there's a group of people, and some of them are based, in different geographical regions, and then they all come together, and then there's a sort of a conclave. At the end of the day, we do always end up with a pope. So, at the end of the day, presumably there will be, some sort of hive mind or consensus, even if everybody has not seen every single show. I do also think it would be, I think you can probably, I don't know, I haven't sat in a judging panel, but I can imagine you get very wedded to a particular position sometimes. But I think what happened in 22, normally what happens is the nominations, or what used to happen is the nominations would come out, and then all the WhatsApp groups would start pinging, and people would say, can you believe so-and-so got nominated, so-and-so didn't. But on that morning, everybody just said, what just happened? Nobody could believe it, because it was just so egregious. So I think, and it sort of goes back to something mentioned, or when we were talking earlier about waking the feminists. I think it was a real thing about, you remember when Fiach McAneil said he didn't look up. He was thinking about everything else and he didn't look up. I think the Irish Times judges didn't look up. Now, in that year, they may not have been capable of looking up, but I do think if there were to be a non-judging sort of presiding chair, or somebody that just says, hang on a minute, do you understand, do you realize that that your deliberations have led you to this point? That might not have happened then, and I think that some sort of helicopter view is useful. Yeah, I think that's all I've got. I think the research is great. I think the looking at what works in other countries is good. I think, and that goes to everything to do with what we were talking about in terms of categories, as well as assessment processes. And then I think there's a really big issue about the money, and about who pays for it, and what needs to be paid for, and how lavish or not does it need to be. You look at something like, for example, the IFTAs, which are completely commercial. So you people who attend, unless you're sort of nominated, you pay, I don't know, €500 to attend. So do we want a theatre award ceremony like that? I don't think so. But somebody needs to pay for it, and so but the first step is as a theatre producer, the first step is budgeting. So somebody needs to draw up a budget for what it is we want to do. And then we need to figure out how to pay for it. And I actually think it's not rocket science. I think if there's a will, it should be possible. And I think there's certainly a will. So I would hope there will be a way.
That's really helpful, Anne. Thank you. I see Deirdre Falvey has her hand up very patiently. Would you like to pop in there, Deirdre?
Hiya, dude. Hiya. Just hiya. This has been really interesting. I'm not, by the way, I'm not speaking for the Irish Times. I'm speaking as someone very interested over a long period, and having attended nothing like the number of awards that you did, Anne, but have been on the periphery for a long time, and sort of aware of what was going on within the Irish Times. But it would have been colleagues really who were more hands-on with it. A few things struck me in the conversation. As far as I'm concerned, as far as anybody I know is concerned, it's hugely missed, and for tons of reasons, that I wouldn't even bother outlining. It's a massive loss, and there are so many times that I'm sitting in an audience and thinking, Jesus, this is an amazing script, or look at that, or the sound on it, and there'll be nothing acknowledging that. But anyway, at the end of the, I don't mean that there aren't other ways that things aren't that things are acknowledged, but it is. I think that what Anne said about things hanging by a thread, probably not by a thread, but things were increasingly more and more complicated, you know, in all sorts of ways. I mean, there was finding and managing and choosing judges was an ongoing challenge, and then also the ever increasing, and brilliantly so, but ever increasing number of shows that there are, and you have a geographic spread, and you have, you know, there's obviously what qualifies and what doesn't qualify as a professional production, but that got bigger and bigger. And I think that the challenges were financial and logistical, leaving aside any issues of bias or anything like that. But there were increasing challenges of that. I mean, you're talking about the costs, and managing the judges and the judges' expenses is also a considerable cost, as well as the actual, it's running the awards through the year, as well as the actual award ceremony. And what Luke was saying about the fringe model is a really interesting model, but it's almost not comparable, because with the fringe, you're talking about a few weeks of a festival all in one city, where you can have a panel of people, but who are going to lots of shows. And if among the judges there is a consideration that, this is an amazing, really low key show that kind of is slipping under the radar, but it was amazing, but people need to go and see it. And I'm talking about the conversation among judges, but you can't do that when you're talking about something that's over the course of a year, over a whole country. And something that happened in February is not possible to see again in August. And if you have a huge panel of people, you really need a reasonable percentage of them to have a panel of judges. I mean, you need to have a reasonable percentage of them seeing the shows that are going to be in the running. Maybe you have a panel of judges for each different category, but then you're talking about even more people that you're trying to manage and source and commit to and pay their expenses for, because traveling, it is a huge, like, judges were not paid, and it is a commitment of time and energy and resources on behalf of judges who, they might get their expenses for going somewhere, but that's, you're talking about over the course of a year, an awful lot of shows. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is not, the fringe model is really interesting, but I don't think it helps. I think it's something as broad as the whole theatre. Within the Irish Times, I would say that there's a sadness probably about what happened. I think there probably needs to be a push if the Irish Times was going to be involved, and there are lots of people in there who would be enthusiastic about it, but it also needs a push from outside, from the sector, I think, and significantly, there is a realization probably that it's not so much operating on a wing and a prayer, but that, like, I remember somebody saying to me after everything blew up in 2022, it was amazing that in 25 years of the Theatre Awards, no judge had gotten sick or had died or had had some family tragedy in the middle of the year and had to pull out, and then there would only be 2 judges. It's really tenuous having 3 people, and depending on them completely. And so it kind of has to be on another basis, and there has to be, I would say, some substantial financial backing of some sort. And the trouble with commercial financial backing is that it fluctuates, and somebody has enthusiasm because they're in an organization, and then they move on to another job, or the company goes through a down phase or whatever, and things change. I mean, I would have thought that there would need to be some state-funded organization, buy-in from some state-funded organization. Well, whether
some state-funded organisation, eh?
Well, there are a number of them.
Could you name it? Thanks,
I don't know. We're talking about Arts Council, universities, Irish Theatre Institute, Theatre Forum. You know, there's. I
But
don't
I
know.
wonder, is that it? Is Anne right? You do up the budget, and
You do
then
up the budget and you
some
see what's
funding
necessary.
comes from different
But how you
organisations.
decide, it's like, you know, but in terms of inclusiveness and acknowledging and you know, changes that there have been in the way that theatre happens. I'm sorry, I'm waffling on here. I should, but you know, things did change over time, and it takes, you know, to add another category, to add another award, you're talking about lots and lots of logistical changes to anything, and you know, you don't rush into things, obviously, but you know, multidisciplinary or you know, there's a crossover within theatre now that there wasn't years ago. And how do you acknowledge that? And for example, you know, opera was added as an award. There was a big push by the dance community to have dance incorporated, but there was, I mean, if you start adding dance, and then you know, you're going to have a few awards for dance, and you're going to, like, it becomes kind of unmanageable. Or how, you know, how do you define things? I don't know. I'm just saying the logistics are quite complicated. What else did I wanted to? Somebody mentioned about the invitations. My understanding, and I never had anything to do with the invitation list, but you know, obviously people, you know, people are who were nominated or shortlisted or whatever were invited, but then the company or the production might also, you know, so you know, if something is nominated from the gate, there's going to be some people from the gate. So but the same would happen with a smaller, less high profile organization. There would be an organization had a certain number of invitations, and they might be juggled around, and it would be clustered around the nominations, if you like. And then as somebody said in the comments, the previous nominees were also invited. I don't think there was ever a feeling of excluding people, or you don't qualify or whatever. It was literally it seemed to be based to me around nominees. And then, but it's not just one person. It's, you know, you have a cluster around a given production because there's a couple of nominations, and therefore the producer or the director or anyway. What else? That was it, really. I think I wanted to say.
Could I just ask you about the that it needs a push from the outside? So if we were to push further, ISTR is no problem pushing. Who do we push? Where do we push?
Are you talking about within the Irish Times? Or are you talking about? Are you? No, you're not.
You know, where does this conversation need to get more visibility?
I think that, speaking of visibility, sorry, I think that losing television, which it wasn't televised other than at the beginning, but that would be a huge benefit on all fronts. It would be in terms of somebody who would be backing the awards, as well as the profile of every single person associated with any nomination, as well as all of the productions. I think it'd be really important to get RT's buy-in and I never understood why, you know, you had lots of names and, you know, people dolled up who had a profile, and, you know, and making speeches that were amusing or revelatory or just nice. You know, I never understood why it wasn't, why they dropped it, actually. You know, I just thought there's lots of worse things that are televised. Sorry, you said where to push.
That's grand. I'll send them an email and ask.
Yeah, I know. It kind of fell between stools, and there again, it's like a lot of things that anyway. So you said where to push. I would say that feasibility study sounds terrific, and trying to work out what would be a good structure, and maybe having an in-person gathering of various stakeholders. Now, I don't know who those stakeholders would all be, but to have a notion about how something could be structured and work in future, and what would be the kind of the non-negotiables that would have to be taken on board. So, I mean, is it a mad idea to have the Arts Council or the Irish Theatre Institute actually involved in an awards?
Doesn't sound mad to me, but I'm not a theatre maker, and I've never been in the awards, so I have to be clear.
But what it is like, I realised that commercial backing, if you're talking about for the financial point of view, is very it's not dependable, you know, longer term, and you need to have a structure that is stable and that is going to work, and it will be much more expensive to run taking on board all of the things that everybody's been saying, which are absolutely bang on, but it's going to cost a huge amount of money, and to have a large panel of judges and to expand the areas that qualify, or to go down the direction of including dance or whatever, it becomes a bigger thing, and which is no harm at all.
It's also a decision at some point. People are willing to spend this money or they're not. And while it'll sound like a huge amount of money to us, because theatre and anything theatre related tends to work on small budgets, if you take it outside the realm of theatre, the arts, and move it into any other realm, it's probably a drop in the ocean. So I'm always careful of internalizing, oh, that's too expensive, or that, because it seems that it can be paid on other things without blinking an eye, which are maybe.
And who are you talking about paying? Yeah.
I suppose I'm talking in terms of budgets in the country, and we have another windfall tax thing, and it'll go on something that never happens, or something.
Maybe the department needs to be pulled into it. I don't. But you're right. I mean, we're constantly being told there's buckets of money out there.
Is it that much money for what Irish theatre and what the arts produce?
Okay.
Maybe it is from one organisation like the Irish Times, which is dealing with journalism in today's world, but just in terms of what Irish theatre and what Irish arts does in Ireland and globally, is it that much money? And again, saying this as someone who doesn't have any money to give it, it can be found if people decide it's worth investing in.
I agree. And
saying that, it's coming up, it's just after 7.
Okay.
Thank you. But I want to see, do any of our panelists want to pop back in following those points? And thank you, Deirdre, for contributing all of that. So whether Anne or Luke or Esosa would like to feed back on anything there, or if there's questions or comments coming through from the chats or other hands up.
Maybe just briefly, I don't know if what is that saying about perfection being the enemy of good, that kind of thing. Are we going to spend so much time talking about the thing and trying to get a very perfect model going before we attempt a thing? And I know this is obviously, if it's not my money that's being put up, it's easy to say, I mean, it's like theater, we have previews. You put a thing on, you try a thing, and you learn from the thing. But if we're only going to be speaking theoretically, does that leave us stuck? And does that leave us not actually doing anything? And then when we talk about the issue of bias, whether conscious or unconscious, and we talk about inclusivity and all that stuff, there is no perfect. There is no, we are getting it absolutely right. That I kind of feel like we need to at least be trying. We take a step, we learn from the step, we figure out how, and we adjust and we tweak and we tweak. I don't know that there's benefit in being like, okay, this is what we're doing and we're going to keep doing this for the next 25 years. Or can that model be shifting and growing and changing as we the industry learn and grow as well?
That's a brilliant point. Thank you. Yeah, and any model, usually these days would have a kind of an automatic review process built in every few years or whatever seems appropriate. If storytelling is involved in the nation and reflects the nation and could test the nation or whatever. And we're so fortunate because we're small in Ireland, we still can have national conversations, which is quite unique these days. That of course it makes sense to stop and think every few years, is this still working? Yeah, thank you, Esosa. Anne, do you have any final thoughts?
Just to say that I think ITI are planning, so when they commission this research, like part of it will be consulting with the sector. So we will all have a chance to feed in terms of the sort of awards we would like to see. And I think we're all raring to go.
Brilliant. Luke, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it just one thing to add maybe would be that it strikes me that the reason it fell apart back in 2022 was because of a lack of diversity within the judging panel. And I totally take Deirdre's point in terms of the logistical challenges of widening that out so that it's a broader range of people. But there's an interesting model in Washington, D.C. They have regional theatre awards, which are called the Helen Hayes Awards, and they have two sort of concurrent I suppose categories. One is the Helen Awards, which I think are the larger scale productions in the DMV, and then the Hayes Awards, which are the smaller scale productions for, we'll say, fringe companies or people making work on an unfunded basis and so forth. So I think I just to pick up on what Anne was saying earlier, I think it's interesting to look at other models and what's working. Obviously, it's a very different context to what we have in Ireland, but there's something maybe within that framework that could be adopted, because they do have a very, very large number of judges on that panel, and it's quite diverse in terms of artistic practice and geography and gender and class and all of those things. So yeah, I think there's maybe something in other international theatre award models that could be brought in. But ultimately, I think it comes down to there being the most important thing, it feels to me anyways, is that there's a more diverse judging panel.
Yeah, thanks. No, absolutely. Yeah. And it's just about getting the infrastructure sorted so that can be achieved. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Luke. Barry, have I missed anyone's comments that we should note before
just one or two. So one is from Luke Lamont, so fellow ISTR member, and it was a question maybe for you, Miriam, but it was just maybe about instituting or beginning an ISTR award that could be within any future Irish Theatre Awards, if I'm reading your comment correctly, Luke. So maybe that's something to think about. It does issue an award for outstanding contribution. Maybe that could become an Irish Theatre Award. And just one other comment in from Aisha about maybe similar to what Anne mentioned there about discussion from within the sector, and that maybe that's going to come within the feasibility report that will happen from ITI, but just the skill set that's already within the theatre community. I suppose, listen to them, incorporate them, and see how people can contribute, maybe even on the process and the practical side of hosting the awards each year as well.
Brilliant. Yeah. I think I just see something else coming in there from Deirdre Falvey. The judging panel should be widened and enlarged, but challenging, absolutely. A small country and yet really difficult to get round. But we definitely won't sort that out this evening. So just to say thanks for all of you. I know it's hard Sunday evening come to turn your work brain on, but we really wanted to do this. Again, we're a step remove, ISTR, from the coalface, of course. And so there's certain things we'll have missed here and are not included, but it's not intentional. And if anyone wants us to focus on a particular issue or support another conversation connected to the awards or connected to anything related to the theatre sector, just drop us an email. There's a website and all the emails are listed there, and we'd be very happy to do that. Because the year is less exciting without the Theatre Awards. Not that I've ever gone, but I did enjoy the WhatsApp groups and the chat and the rage and all of it, because that's just human life, isn't it? Before the bots take over completely. And I'm also very happy to, ring around people and ask them for money. It just doesn't bother me. I don't know, we get so used to it at work. So maybe there's ways we can help out there. Because to me, it's such a no-brainer to not only invest in this, but to really invest in it and nurture it. Because the moment you stop having your strong storytelling community, good luck, what's left. So on that cheerful note, I will say a good evening, and we'll get this posted to the YouTube channel and get in touch if there's any other conversations we can support. So